When I was a young guy in the farming industry in California, they pretty much had kind of invented the big tomato greenhouses back in those days, the hot houses they called them. They were huge. Sometimes they're 100 yards long, a big dome-shaped buildings. First thing they would do when they put everything and all equipment in, they would put in a big fan and a CO2 concentrator at the end of the building, and they would blow enriched air, enriched with carbon dioxide, to enrich the air so the plants would grow faster. We never lost one worker, not one, ever, in those hothouses. And the fact of the matter is, if we actually would increase the level of CO2 in the world today, agricultural output would skyrocket. These people can't seem to figure this out. We need carbon dioxide. And listen, if we could do what they want to do, they would like to reduce carbon dioxide down to almost just minimal levels where there's virtually none in the atmosphere. If we did that, James, we would sterilize the earth. Sterilize the earth. The plants would die. The oxygen would be breathed up, and with no way to replace it, we would die. This is absolute nearsighted insanity. There's been a rapid succession of events at the UN in this last quarter. Starting on September 25, we had the so-called 2030 Agenda Conference in New York City. That's the one that Pope Francis came to give the keynote speech. That meeting solidified an agenda. They call it 2030 Agenda. 180 nations of the world signed on to it. It proposed a number of goals and a number of principles to get there, milestones to get there. And this replaced the Millennium Development Goals that the United Nations had created back in the year 2000. That the Millennium Development Goals were only good for 15 years, and they were expiring at the end of this year. So the United Nations had to do something to extend those goals. Now they call them, these new goals, they call them just the Sustainable Development Goals. There's several nations around the world that are throwing up big question marks. You know, they're thinking, we've been really screwed before. This is about the fourth time. I wonder if this is going to be good for us. And they're asking some stiff questions like, who's going to pay for this in particular? And how's it going to affect us?
Well, that's the important question, because unfortunately, again, this all does come back down to the monetary aspect of this. And I think that's what you're pointing to in this editorial talking about the war on carbon and the Carbon Tracker Initiative. Of course, we know that the idea supposedly is to get carbon emissions, by which, of course, we're talking about carbon dioxide. So even there, this sort of sleight of hand or sloppy language, which belies, I think, the sloppiness of the argument in general. But anyway, they're talking about a carbon bubble deflation, which puts it in a very interesting financial argument. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that and why you think this is being framed in that way at this time.
It's actually being framed in every conceivable way that you can imagine. This is one I picked up on because of my financial background. And I figured this is pretty unique, actually, on their part. And instead of just going directly after the prime ministers of the countries and so on, they're going after the financial world. They're going after the big companies. They're going after the banks. And they're going into them essentially telling them, if you don't get rid of the assets that you have that pertain to oil and coal, then later on, if what we say comes to pass, and there's no guarantee that's going to happen, but this is the way they couch it. If you end up with a bunch of abandoned assets that you can't get rid of or that become worthless, you're going to have a liability to your shareholders because you haven't managed the company correctly, and you could be prosecuted for mismanagement and have personal liability. This is actually what they're saying to them. This is incredible. This is like the mob almost. It's like it's almost like extortion. But companies are buying into it. Oh yeah, man, I don't want to be held liable for anything. Better go along with this program. So they're getting companies to sell off their assets. They're going after utilities especially, but even investment companies, hedge funds, you name it. They're mounting a massive divestment program.
But who's buying? That's really the question. Who's on the other side of that transaction?
Well, isn't that the truth? I have no idea. who's on the other side. It's obviously it's going to drive properties down, and with the price of oil down where it is right now, it's like it's like a disaster already. So I don't know, but the point is they're scaring the crud out of the corporate world, and they're getting them to go along with the program and to back sustainable development because of it. The thing that's really weird, and you read the article, I know, the Carbon Tracker Initiative mirrors the United Nations exactly. They're lined up perfectly well. They want to reduce the extraction of coal and oil to zero by 2030. To zero. That means no more oil come out of the ground, no more coal be dug out of the ground. What's astounding to this, I can only speak for the United States right now, but 67% of our energy comes from oil and coal, period. 67%. Only 7% comes from other things like wind and solar. And so while these guys are busily making haste to destroy the brown industry, if you will, they have no viable plan to replace the energy deficit that they're creating. None. They really don't. And I thought, well, that's silly. Of course, they think they're going to build windmills all over the world or something. But Bill Gates, who is big into global warming issues right now, he said he wrote a piece had an interview a few weeks ago, and he said that we need more R&D. That's what we need. And the governments need to step up to the plate and put up all kinds of money and just give it to private industry. Give it to private industry, get that part, to go out and do R&D and come up with solutions on how we can increase the alternative energy and replace this stuff. And you know what? He said, we don't have anything on the plate right now that would really do it, but he's hoping for a miracle. That's what he said. He used that word, miracle. I'm hoping for a miracle. Well, okay, they're destroying the oil industry, they're destroying the coal industry to get rid of all that bad CO2-based stuff. They're creating a huge energy deficit. If it's not filled, the world will be back in the dark ages again, literally. And they have no plan, and the best they can do is hope for a miracle. That's not a good equation.
No.
This is insanity. And
it's in fact genocidal. If you cannot replace this huge glaring energy deficit that is going to be created by this plan, there are people who will literally die from this, as there have been, for example, in recent years in the UK, people literally dying from cold winters as this entire global movement is being set up to try to stop the world from warming. It is insanity, but it is an insanity that appeals to people at a very basic level that a lot of people have signed on to. Sustainable development sounds like a good thing to a lot of people because it's phrased in this language that comes with a lot of, warm, fuzzy rhetoric, and it's talking about saving the planet, and everyone knows carbon dioxide is the global thermostat for the entire globe, and it will either warm up the planet or we can turn that back down by getting rid of carbon. Of course, this is the kind of thinking that's been inculcated in the public, so I think we have to confront this squarely head on to show that it is not such a straightforward equation. So how do we go about even beginning to broach this subject?
When I was in the first grade, one of the experiments our teacher had, she brought out a little paper cup. We didn't have styrofoam back in those days. She brought a little paper cup. We put some dirt in it, and she passed around a lima bean to every student, stuck the lima bean down in the dirt, put a little water on it. And she said, now you watch what happens. We're going to follow along with it. You watch every day. We're going to come in and we're going to check our little bean and see what's going on. She explained to us the whole Monty of how life works and stuff. She explained photosynthesis. She explained the life cycle, how the plants give off oxygen. We breathe the oxygen. We give off carbon dioxide so the plant can grow. And it was a wonderful thing. And we understood it. A first grader can understand how the world works. These people can't seem to figure this out. We need carbon dioxide. And listen, if we could do what they want to do, they would like to reduce carbon dioxide down to almost just minimal levels where there's virtually none in the atmosphere. If we did that, James, we would sterilize the earth. Sterilize the earth. The plants would die. The oxygen would be breathed up, and with no way to replace it, we would die. This is absolute nearsighted insanity. It's just crazy talk. Nobody has ever died. out in the open in any case because of an overdose of carbon dioxide. That's stupid. Carbon monoxide, yes, but it's not the same. When I was a young guy in the farming industry in California, they pretty much had kind of invented the big tomato greenhouses back in those days, the hothouses they called them. They were huge. Sometimes they're 100 yards long, a big dome-shaped buildings. First thing they would do when they put everything and all equipment in, they would put in a big fan and a CO2 concentrator at the end of the building, and they would blow enriched air, enriched with carbon dioxide, to enrich the air so the plants would grow faster. We never lost one worker, not one, ever, in those hothouses. And the fact of the matter is, if we actually would increase the level of CO2 in the world today, agricultural output would skyrocket.
Again, unfortunately, this is something that's difficult for people to understand because we have been told that it is a corporate sort of oil industry argument to argue against this, whereas, in fact, I think the question that is never asked by these same people is who is behind the other side of this equation? Who is behind the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the other bodies that are promoting this brand of austerity that people are seemingly embracing wholeheartedly? And I think this is something that you talk about quite effectively in Technocracy Rising. So let me just quote a passage that I think is particularly pertinent. You say, for example, the Rio Declaration, talking about the Rio Earth Summit Conference in 1992, also produced 3 legally binding agreements that were open for signature by participating nations. First, there was the Convention on Biological Diversity that covered ecosystems, species, and genetic resources, and that ultimately produced the massive 1,140-page Global Biodiversity Assessment document. Second, there was the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which, of course, is the body governing the COP, Conference of the Parties, that's coming up in Paris. And third, there was the United Nations Conventions to Combat Desertification. During the Rio Conference, then Secretary General of the UN, Boutros Ghali, also called for the creation of the Earth Charter, which was later completed and published on June 29th, 2000. And it has such warm, fuzzy rhetoric as, "We stand at a critical moment in Earth's history, a time when humanity must choose its future," and other such dramatic language. And you go on to note, "It is not coincidental that the principal author of the Earth Charter was Stephen C. Rockefeller, the son of the former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and nephew of David Rockefeller." And it is interesting how often these types of bodies and their pronouncements go back to the very same families that are the oil industry, the Rockefellers. There is no name that is more closely associated with the history of oil than the Rockefellers, and yet they are at the heart of the UN takeover of the planet through this carbon agenda. How do we reconcile that seeming paradox?
It has been their agenda from 1973 when the Trilateral Commission was formed to create a new international economic order. That's what they said back then. It was all over their literature. And the only thing new that's come along since the 1930s is technocracy. And that's, we see the policies being worked out in sustainable development and climate change and so on today. The patterns are unmistakable. People have to trust me on this for now. Read my book and you'll see why I'm saying this. The Trilateral Commission has been the action group that has brought us all this stuff that we're looking at today. They brought us Agenda 21 at the Rio Conference in the first place. They brought us things like the Earth Charter. They brought us all the dialogue on or the what do you call it, the rhetoric on climate change. Al Gore, for instance, the poster boy for climate change, for Pete's sake. Remember the Trilateral Commission. So we see these people's fingerprints all over this. And it's just astounding. You say, why would they be doing this? Or why technocracy? Well, technocracy is about controlling resources. They want to take the resources away from people like you and me, and even governments, and even local governments, and state governments, and federal governments. They want to take the resources away and put them into a global trust for the common good. This is a master scheme. This is the end game, if you will. We don't see it. We don't see it quite yet, but you can clearly see it if you look at the UN closely enough. Land and resources that have, like forest, farming, oil, minerals, whatever, all these things are being locked up away from our usage in any case. And climate change is being used as the fear-mongering tool to stampede people into the only solution that's being offered, namely sustainable development. So it's a 1-2 punch. The trade treaties are coming in behind this. TPP, for instance, Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Investment and Trade Partnership, TTIP, coming right behind this one. Same thing. Between those two treaties, 100% of the global GDP will be accounted for. They're writing a document that will put enforcement into sustainable development, and we will have no choice. And so, why are they doing it? Well, once they get control of the resources of the world, they will have a monopoly, literally, on everything. The Rockefeller family, going all the way back to John D., has been a monopolistic company. And I believe it was John D. that said that competition is a sin. But if sustainable development gets kicked in, they will control all of the resources everywhere and every kind of resource, not just oil, everything. And all you can figure when you look at stuff like this is that the inmates have escaped and taken over the asylum. They look straight, they wear suits and ties, they have their white coat, whatever. They talk with, 4-syllable words. And they have a very serious expression on their face. If you look at it close enough, you realize they're really the inmates in this mess, They're just crazier than March hares. But, how they cannot confront these things is beyond me, other than just say they're out of touch with reality.
And also the suggestion, as has been floated for years and has been recently renewed by Bill Gates and others, is, of course, we need a carbon tax. And this steps in line with another part of the technocracy agenda that you've noted, the introduction of global taxation, just one step away, using the furor over corporate tax loopholes to try to garner support for a UN-administered or other international administered taxation grid. And the carbon tax could be one foot in the door for the beginnings of that, the thin edge of the wedge, as it were. Tell us about that agenda.
Absolutely. The United Nations has been trying to get an autonomous source of income for 20 years at least. And they've tried kind of a frontal approach many times, but the way it looks like a global tax is going to be acceptable to everyone is everybody's pointing a finger at the global corporations who are evading taxes by moving assets around from Ireland to, Holland. And I don't understand the whole thing myself, but, offshore countries like the Cayman Islands and so on, they're able to move money around and avoid taxes in every country. And so, countries that impose taxes are getting sick of this, but they can't touch them. They can't, America can't go to Ireland and do anything. It's their own country. But if a global tax is proposed now to stop this, and everybody in the world is taxed, there you go. You got it. It's in the bag. And they're working on it right now to figure out a way to do it. And if they do it for the major corporations, essentially it's going to be for everybody else as well. The cat will be out of the bag at that point.
Unfortunately, that is the point, I think. Of course, yes, everyone's angry at these corporations that seem to skirt the grid, but of course that just means they're going to tighten the noose around everyone's neck. Oh, don't throw us into the briar patch. Yes, again, it's about consolidation of power, and the only way to do that is to get popular support for that. So again, it's about fostering this popular support.
Yes, and it's the same thing with trying to get cash out of society right now, too. There's big talk amongst the big banking institutions to eradicate cash altogether and have everybody go digital. In my opinion, that would be catastrophic for a whole section of society worldwide. But they're talking about it, and serious people, the big banks like the Goldman Sachs and the Deutsche Banks and, Bank of England, they're all talking about cashless society right now. They, push everybody into the system. And the excuse they're using for this is, well, there's people out there laundering drug money, and they're using cash to do it. Well, we can't have that. It's like, excuse me, how much of the world trade that has to do with drugs? Maybe it's a lot, but let them do business with credit cards if they have to. But to use that as an excuse to take cash out of society everywhere is insane.
Well, yes, especially since the CIA has been implicated in drug running over and over and over for decades now, and even officially the Senate has admitted the CIA was involved in drug running in the 80s, and that was from a Senate report chaired by John Kerry in the 1990s. So there you go. It's not even a conspiracy theory at this point. But this is one of those things that's so institutional and broad and so detached from our everyday sphere of influence. What can the average person who is concerned about this actually do to help derail this momentum?
Well, I'll tell you, as far as America is concerned, for sure, I believe Americans need to get off their lazy duff and get out and clean up their own community. This Agenda 21 program has trickled down to every community in America. Just every one. It's just amazing. It's taken root. It's like a bad case of crabgrass in your lawn. And every community has this. And Americans need to wake up and quit shaking their fist at Washington or whoever they're going to shake their fist at, and get out in their local community and kick this stuff out of their community and say, no, we're not going to do this. This is wrong. If there was even 100 communities in America who did that, who really, really cleaned up their own communities and transformed them back where they should be, constitutionally speaking, that would send a message up the food chain that they have a rebellion on their hands.
Hi, I'm Alex Newman, and today I want to talk to you about the UN Agenda 2030, often called the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Post-2015 Development Agenda. So, in a nutshell, this is, to describe it simply, this is just a roadmap for global totalitarianism. It would basically create a global, centralized, technocratic, socialistic, communistic, whatever you want to call it, regime under the guise of all kinds of nice sounding things, saving Mother Earth. The document tells us it's going to heal Mother Earth. It also tells us that we need wealth redistribution. So it would create this kind of totalitarian global government under the guise of saving the planet. This is an extremely dangerous document. If you read through it, what you'll find is that this is basically every totalitarian's dream packaged with a nice marketing package, and it needs to be opposed. So let's go through some of the problems with this. I think a good place to start is goal number 10. Now this goal calls for reducing inequality within and among nations. Now, how do you reduce inequality within and among nations? Well, of course, you do that with wealth redistribution. You take wealth from people who have it, and you redistribute it to people who don't. That's the idea. And it's not enough to just have national socialism. Here, they're talking about inequality between nations. And so what they're really plotting here is to transfer the wealth of what remains of the middle class and, of course, the poor in the Western world, the United States and Europe and Australia and Canada, and Japan and so on, and transfer it to third world dictators through the United Nations, which of course would take its cut. Now, obviously the real wealth, the billionaires and the trillionaires are not going to be surrendering any of their money. They're coming after, everyday average Americans. Now, to get some perspective as to how much wealth they want to redistribute, consider that the last official price tag I saw, which was published by a Reuters propagandist, said they were going to need more than 170 trillion with a T dollars to implement this agenda. Now, not all of that would go to wealth redistribution to prop up third world dictators, but a lot of it would. So we're talking about a massive amount of money here. For some perspective, the U.S. economy is about $17 trillion per year, the GDP. So we are dealing with an enormous sum of money here that would completely restructure the world. And actually, the document makes this pretty clear all throughout. It says that no one can be left behind. And when they say no one, they mean no one. Not a single Indian living in the Amazon rainforest, not a single American living in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No one can be left behind by this crazy UN agenda. Now, some of the socialists of the world, the former head of NATO, actually a socialist, Javier Solana, he said that this would be the next great leap forward. And he published this in a Soros-funded propaganda organ. For those who remember, the last great leap forward involved the deaths of tens of millions of people. It took place in communist China. After the communists took over, they launched this great leap forward that was supposedly going to take the Chinese people forward. Actually, it just killed a lot of them. And David Rockefeller later went to communist China. David Rockefeller is a big sustainability globalist guy who admits in his book to conspiring with secret cabal against the interests of the United States to create a one-world system. He wrote in the New York Times after going to China that the social experiment under the butcher, communist mass murderer Chairman Mao was one of the most important in all of history. Now, the communist Chinese dictatorship has actually come out and proudly bragged about its role in creating this this Agenda 2030. They said they played a crucial role in developing this crazy UN agenda for wealth redistribution. Other parts of this agenda, we could go to goal number 4, for example, which deals with education. Now, read this document, read Agenda 2030. It's not all that long. Anybody can read it. And they tell you in here that they're going to brainwash your kids. They tell you that all the children need to be so-called educated so that they have the knowledge and the skills necessary not just to accept sustainable development, but to promote sustainable development. Now, sustainable development is this UN ideology. I was actually at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development in 2012 down in Rio de Janeiro. And, just to give you some idea of what this ideology is about, there was one poster that encapsulated it perfectly. It had a sick Earth, an anthropomorphic Earth with a thermometer sticking out of its mouth. And then the doctor came and said, I know your problem. You have humans, as if humans are a disease, right? What do you do with a disease? Well, you try to eradicate it. You try to destroy it, right? And so they're treating humans here as a disease that needs to be dealt with. Now, this document says it's going to heal Mother Earth by imposing this sustainable development vision on us. It says that children and young people are critical agents of change to bring about this sustainable development transformation. So what they're talking about here, and they say we need vaccines for all and government health care for everyone and abortions for everyone, right? They say reproductive and sexual health, and everybody knows that means abortion. They haven't been shy about talking about that. So they're talking about a global totalitarian government that would redistribute wealth, that would control the entire economy, right? In this document, they talk about that we need to change the way we consume and produce things. The only way to do that, of course, is to control, using government, the way that things are produced and consumed. So we are dealing here with a very dangerous document. Now, on the bright side, despite all the praise from third world dictators, right? Robert Mugabe, the genocidal Marxist mass murderer who's enslaved Zimbabwe, he said this is going to usher in this wonderful, he called it a brave new world, right? A brave new world. That's what Robert Mugabe said, and he thought it was great. The document is just packed with crazy extremism, and so it's no wonder that the dictators of the world love it. We need to stop it, though. And fortunately for us, this is essentially meaningless as it relates to the United States. Obama knew that there was no chance the U.S. Senate would ratify this monstrosity, and so he just signed it as this kind of executive agreement. Fortunately for Americans, executive agreements are actually non-things, right? These don't really exist, so Obama's been trying to implement this using executive orders and all kinds of other stuff. But the Trump administration has taken a pretty hard line on the United Nations. Trump called the UN enemy of freedom and an enemy of the United States. So, why would you want to implement the Agenda 2030 of your enemy, of the enemy of your country, of the enemy of freedom? Well, you wouldn't want to, right? So let's hope for the best, but we need to get busy. We need to oppose this. We need to educate others. We need to be in communication with our members of Congress to make sure that this monstrosity is stopped in its tracks.